How do we know that we're going to die? We know this. All of us, well, we human beings, when you reach a certain age. One of the themes that we're following in this course is the fact of that knowledge and the repercussions on our consciousness. That is, we're aware of our mortality, and this was a theme that was quite strong in Jonas's essay, The Burden and Blessing of Mortality, and perhaps is in the background of everything that we read. But let's think about it. How do we know that? How do we become aware of death, and how do we become aware of the inevitability of, of death? This is the perhaps question that seems useless in a way, because death is such as a fact. We know I'm going to die, you are going to die, everybody we know is going to die, and that's not something that maybe we find it useful to articulate very often. But we know this, but how do we know it? I mean, again, it may seem not only useless but tasteless to ask ourselves that sort of question, but it's the kind of question that I think might raise other questions which are worthwhile to ask. And if we look at it, and this talk is really meant to just be a general talk on the first two sections of Landsberg's The Experience of Death. I think that is the starting question. You know, what is the epistemological basis? What's the how do we know? After an introduction in which we are, I think, given a sense of his general approach, that is the opening lines, what is the meaning of death to the human being as a person? Not too difficult, you know, to grasp what he's asking there, I guess, at least in the simple sense what words mean. But we get a sense that this is a different approach, obviously, from the first few readings that we're looking at, Epicurus, Hegel, Bruckner, and Fischer, and much more in the spirit of Jonas and existentialism, in the sense that there's an attempt here, of course, to broaden our approach to not only view death as an event at the end of life, as a limit, but to ask about the meaning and significance of death within life. And there is, of course, both an irony and a certain philosophical position being staked out by the very title of the essay, The Experience of Death, which, of course, is a denial of the Epicurean, you might call logic of death as something that we never experience, something that would be logically impossible to experience, because experience presupposes that you are alive, so there's no experience of death. So this notion of sort of bringing death more into life, or viewing death not as just sort of this absolute limit which we never actually experience in life, but death as part of life, which is, again, with Jonas and the existentialists, the sort of change in position. And the human being as a person. Now, we'll see that personhood, as opposed to simply being an organism, is a very important point for Landsberg, thematic later on. The meaning of death to the human being as a person, not simply, one might say, using a certain terminology, as a human being, as a member of the species, Homo sapiens, living, breathing organism, but as a person, which is, as we'll see, a different level of existence, our existence, terrestrial existence for Landsberg. The thing really gets going with the quote from Voltaire in section 1, the human race is the only one that knows it must die, and it knows this only through its experience. Now, what is contained within that? Landsberg says there are two theses there. I think that there are at least three theses there. But we see right away the thesis that we are aware of death, and that makes us different, that we're thematically aware of it in a way that animals aren't, that animals can have some notion of some event upcoming, but they can't view it in kind of intellectual terms that we can. that it knows, human race knows it must die. That is, that's another big theme that's being brought here. It's not that it knows that it will happen, but it must happen. That is, we are aware on some level of the necessity of death, which is problematic. And that is linked up with the third thing that's said here, that it knows this only through its experience. Of course, right away, Landsberg has to deal with the problem of induction. That is, if we become aware of our fate in mortality, our fate, our ultimate fate in death, and if we do it through our experience, that is, through our experience of the world, in the sense we realize we live in a world, if we, strictly speaking, what do we realize? Do we live in a world where we are told, or it's part of our general common sense consciousness as we enter into a kind of a more grown-up way of seeing the world, that everything that has ever lived, and more importantly, every person that's ever lived, has died. On the basis of that, and then perhaps our own observation of the world, I mean, we very rarely see things die, or if we do, note what is actually happening. But one could say that this is nevertheless an inductive thing. That is, that from the experience, either our own personal experience or the experience of the human race, everything that has lived has died. So we can certainly generalize in an inductive way. Well, we can say that all things die. All things that live eventually die. But that is, of course, a generalization in the process of induction. And like all inductive generalizations, it is only a matter of probability, not a matter of necessity. So Landsberg is well aware of this in the first section, in the reference to Hume, the famous empiricist philosopher, who was one of many who's pointed out the nature of induction and the nature of the thing that we can get out of it, the general proposition that we can extract from our observation of particular instances, is only one of varying degrees of probability, not necessity. So it is not there that Landsberg is going to find the necessity, and therefore the quote that he begins with, Voltaire, remains mysterious. So what is he looking for then, and how is he going to find it? At the bottom of page 194, he asks the question, is there a specific experience of death through which one might learn that death was natural to man in the wholeness of his personal life? And then continuing to 195, and this experience, which already allows us to establish the fact of considerable probability, does it not also confront us with the fact of necessity? If we think of some of the things that he says later on, that notion of death as being natural to man in the wholeness of his personal life becomes highly problematic. And I'm thinking specifically of the things he says later on as death as being external, something that is introduced from the outside, from an alien sphere into life. Death as menace, death as threat, death as a negation of something, death as foreign. So that, I don't know if that's an inconsistency or an irony or a translation thing or what, to say death, if he says death is natural to man. Of course, in a way it is, in a way it isn't. Perhaps that's the best way to put it. So as a leading question, looking into this very difficult text, I'd say that the question, as I've suggested, is how do we become aware of the necessity of death? Is there something within our actual experience that clues us in that death is not just something that seems to happen a lot or that is highly probable, so probable that we'd be foolish to act on any other basis, but still in a matter of probability? Or is there some way that we, in our experience, that we experience something like a hint of the necessity of death? That death is not only a highly likely probability for us and for everyone, but death is actually a necessary thing for the person.